Hello, hi, cyberspace. Welcome to this week's Doc Talk discussion, which is presented by the Carroll County Arts Council. My name is Amy Oden. I am a producer with Maryland Public Television, recruited by CCAC to be your host for the evening. All of the screenings in the series are free, but donations for the events can be made on the CCAC's website. And this week's film is Antarctica, a Year on the Ice. Please feel free to post comments or questions in the chat on YouTube and on Facebook, because we're going to be taking some of them towards the end of the discussion. And I guess without any further ado, I would like to introduce the panelists and ask them the first question about their experiences in Antarctica. Awesome, everybody's here. Good, this is working. So yeah, I guess I just will go, around the clock from top to bottom. So if you guys can unmute yourselves one by one, that would be helpful. But I guess we'll start with Michael. My first, if you want to give a general introduction to who you are and what your experience was in Antarctica, my first question was just going to be, if you could tell us what year you were there and why, and just sort of what it felt like to step off the plane.
Sure. I was there in 2005. I had intentions to go back, but life just speeds by. I was down there because the power plant at McMurdo is a diesel plant, but it did not used to be. It used to be nuclear. And eventually, at one point, it became illegal for nuclear material. Ronald Reagan signed a treaty. So they powered up the backup plant, but they never built a backup for the backup. And the year before I was there, they almost lost the station because of a terrible storm. Not to be too dramatic about it. So they decided quickly to come up with a plan to rip out part of the water plant and put it in the power plant, to rip out part of the power plant and put it in the water plant. That way, either building could keep everybody going in the winter, should one of them blow away. So I was there for that project, which was handled by Raytheon Polar Services, a contractor in Antarctica. And as far as the plane, we landed on the Ross Ice Shelf. They use bulldozers to create a runway. There are no runways, of course, in Antarctica. So they're constantly recreating it on a daily basis. And we landed on the ice and on a big Air Force aircraft. And I got out and I looked up. It was a bright sunny day. I don't remember the temperature, to be honest. I remember the volcano. Mount Erebus is 12,500 feet high. It's taller than any volcano in Europe. And it was blindingly white with, smoke rising up out of it. And it was right in front of my field of vision. And that kind of the memory was burned into my mind. So
yeah, for sure. Lily, do you want to go next?
Hi. So I am an artist, and I was actually there for 2 seasons. One was 2012 to 2013. No, 2011 to 2012, and then 2014 to 2015. And the first memory I have of landing and stepping off the plane is just this transformative rush of adrenaline where you're surrounded by this vastness like you've never experienced. You feel like you can see forever. You're on this ice shelf, as Michael described. I went through the U.S. Antarctic program, and I'm an artist, but I work with scientists. So I was embedded with a geology expedition the first time. The second time I was there through a program for artists, which this director, Anthony Powell, also participated in. So yeah, just that experience of being there is overwhelming. The silence that Anthony describes in the film really hits you immediately. I mean, there's people around you shuffling, but there's just the vastness is just totally overwhelming. And then the emotion that goes with being subsumed by that vastness is like a very unique feeling.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I want to ask you more about the various natural world experiences you had, but we'll definitely come back to it. Brian, you want to talk about your experience on the boats?
Hi, yeah. I'm Brian Evans. I'm a professor at Pace University in New York City. I was in Antarctica, well, exactly 11 years ago right now. I was there in the Antarctic summer, which right now, and I got to celebrate New Year's Eve on the boat. So I came in on boat, not a plane, from Ushuaia in Argentina. And it's several days across the Drake Passage. I remember just kind of feeling, because it's a few days, relief that we're finally over the Drake, because the rumors were it could be quite choppy. We were fortunate it wasn't too bad coming in, but it was bad coming back. So we kept getting told, you're lucky, it's not too bad. But nonetheless, glad to be across the Drake. I know 2-3 days doesn't sound like a long time, but out in the open sea, it was the longest I've ever been on the open sea. I was just kind of anxious, and so just overwhelmed by finally seeing land again, knowing it's not land on the other 6 continents, it's Antarctica. So that was a thrill of a lifetime.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Did you did you get to like disembark and set foot and have like a weird cathartic moment?
Zodiac landings were common every day. We would get off the ship, we'd sleep mostly on the ship, but there was one night of camping. And so one night of sleeping on the continent, but mostly sleeping on the ship.
Man, that's so wild. So I wanted to kind of first and foremost, I feel like, so Anthony Powell is the filmmaker. And one of the things that he talks about in the film is kind of like the experience of like the purity of nature down there, and kind of like how everything is relatively untouched, and like all of that being like a very unique experience. So I guess I wanted to start by talking a little bit about that, and maybe Lily, you're the person to lead that charge, because like you got to go to a bunch of different kinds of places, and see lots of different environments, you know?
Yes, it feels like you're on another planet. So I was there the second time as part of the National Science Foundation Antarctic Artists and Writers Program, where they send 1 or 2 artists each year. They select somebody, and you make work about the research that's being conducted, and then or just the place. So I kind of did both. And as part of my project, I spent a month scuba diving every day under the sea ice of McMurdo Sound. So out of the research station, which is on the coast. And the sea ice there is 6 feet thick. And they either drill or blast a hole in the sea ice. And then you go down through this 4-foot wide hole. And the diving, for me, this isn't covered in this film, but everything about Antarctica is unique, but the diving is perhaps the most unusual experience, because it's the largest expanse of sea ice in the world. So there's sea ice all around you, and the sea ice glows in this amazing way, and it's not just blue. There's algae that grows inside it that makes it glow neon green and gold, and then turquoise. And there are all these crazy formations, these giant sort of icicles called brine channels. And then you can see over 1,000 feet, which most scuba diving anywhere else in the world, the max is 100 feet usually. And that's like an amazing place. So it feels like you're not even in water. It feels like you're flying through the air. So that was probably the most, trippy is really the best word I can use to describe it. It's totally psychedelic. And, but everywhere in Antarctica is pretty psychedelic, because there's just nothing like it. There's no sense of scale. There's no trees. The buildings are just in one area. So there's no foliage. There's nothing to tell you how far away something is. So it's just completely disorienting. And then the constant sunlight, or if you're wintering, Michael can talk about the constant dark. That's also pretty unusual. So just the whole thing is just like you're in a parallel universe where there's very few familiar sights or feelings.
Yeah. Can you talk about the dry valley too? Because I feel like that's a rare experience.
Yeah. So I also spent time working with geologists in the dry valleys who study it and biologists who study it as an analog to Mars. So Antarctica is one of the driest places on the planet, and in particular, the dry valleys. And they are part of the 2% of the continent that's not completely ice covered. So it looks a lot like a Mars landscape. And there are these dramatic glacial carved valleys with really steep cliffs all around you, or valley edges. Yeah, it just feels like you've stepped onto Mars. And then, of course, when you're there, you're camping. So I was living in a tent there for several weeks. So you're just totally immersed in this environment, and it changes you. That's something that Anthony, I think, covered really well in the film as well. Just that it's really a transformative experience. Like, you don't come back the same person.
Yeah, I feel like I really felt the magnitude of the situation in the film, I think the time lapse and all of that kind of helps convey that. But yeah, it seems just like a very enormous space to be in.
Yeah. It's an interesting challenge for me as a painter, because I've always worked, this is one of my older paintings, it's chitons. They're a little invertebrate. So a lot of my technique in painting is taking something small and magnifying it. But when I went to Antarctica, I had to do the reverse, where a lot of my paintings are like 8 feet long, but to capture the vastness, the expansiveness of it is a really interesting challenge as an artist. And I think the film did that beautifully too. It was really beautifully shot.
The widest wide angle lens, right?
Yeah.
So Brian, since you were there during the summer, I don't know what pieces of nature, I guess, would be available to you that I definitely want to ask Michael about the experience of being there in total darkness, but
yeah, I was there right around the solstice, so it was mostly always light, if I recall correctly, but it was the wildlife, a lot of wildlife. I mean, penguins, gentoo and adelie mentioned in the film. I know chinstrap penguins, they're everywhere. And we were told that since they don't have a natural land predator, they don't have a natural fear of a human, and most of them have never seen a human before. Some may have, but probably not. And they're just, the curiosity. I know Michael, before we started, mentioned that about penguins, or animals in general in Antarctica that might approach. And they were, for being only this big, they were very brave, and we were probably the weirdest things they've ever seen in their lives. We wear clothes, humans are not an animal they run into. But the penguins and the humpback whales was another thing, watching, when they dive, really majestic. But otherwise, just like Lily said, the desolation. But it also kind of reminds you of the fragility of the planet in a way too, in that that cold desolation. And my guess is most people who are there are people who are environmentally conscious anyway. People, I mean, if you're interested in Antarctica, you're probably interested in the environment, and it's just a reminder about how our actions, which even going there, the amount of fossil fuels you consume going there makes you kind of think about all that. But yeah, being more environmentally aware, I think, is something that a lot of people come back with, just experiencing such a a natural, desolate place that's mostly untouched, and the fear of, like the film mentioned, the fear of what can happen to a place like that. I mean, the last unspoiled place on the planet, and it's all we've got left in that way.
Yeah, definitely, very much like just uncharted territory in so many ways. All right, Michael, 2005, you're in the dark. Tell me about what the natural world was like.
Well, it was truly dark. Now, not right away. People think about that. The sun sets slowly. So if in the film, you see him, I think, 2 different times. You see the sun going around the sky. At one point, it dips down towards the horizon, but then cheats back up. And it goes that all the time. When I first got there, February 4th, it just kind of went in a circle. It very slowly winds down towards the horizon, so that you actually get like a 3-week sunset, where it's really scooching behind the Olympic mountain range. She knows McMurdo, the Olympic mountain range, Mount Discovery. It's scooching behind those, just never goes anywhere, just scooch. But eventually you get a couple weeks of normal days and nights. And the last day was, if I remember right, 6 minutes long. Sunrise was like 6:01 a.m. and sunset was 6 minutes later. The sun came up and it went, and that was it. And then we had this twilight for a while, and the sky became truly indigo. And then the Southern Lights started. Now, the Southern Lights, they're actually called an X1 proton event, according to NOAA. NOAA treats us like their little pet project, I think. They would send us these little weather reports, which was just on their own time. These little, whenever they thought there were going to be Southern Lights, everybody hears about the Aurora Borealis, which is the Northern Lights. Down there, it's the Aurora Australis, which we seldom speak of here. It's the same phenomenon. And it was amazing, breathtaking, insanely so. But it really didn't come out in all of its glory until June and July, when it was truly, truly black. But there was one night where it was like 81 below with the wind chill. I should have gone inside, but it was too beautiful. The tears were frozen on my face. They talk about that in the film. And I was looking up with two other guys in a really strong wind. You literally could lean into it and not be able to fall down. But the Southern Lights were out. We went away from the station because the lights never shut off in the winter. It's dangerous. If you shut those sulfur lights off, you couldn't see. So unfortunately, McMurdo, what I called MACTown, or Mars, McMurdo Antarctic Research Station, Mars, we had to get away from it to really appreciate the lights. And we'd go out to a place called Castle Rock. People can look it up, about out a couple miles away. And we would hide behind it to really see the Southern Lights. But there was one night we were out there and there was a meteor shower. So I'm looking up into the heavens. It's something I'm unfortunately completely incapable of describing. He did a much better job, Ants, when he filmed it. But there were meteors streaming through it. And I could see the International Space Station and the Southern Lights all at the same time. And that's just really hard to describe. But weirdly, when it came to the phenomenon, the physical phenomenon, what really struck me was before the sun went down and after, because of these other effects you get on the ice. There's something called Fata Morgana, or phantasmagoria is what it's called. And you get these strange magnifications. I'd love to see Lily try to draw them, because what it is, or paint them, is very small imperfections on the surface of the ice get hugely amplified by some atmospheric phenomena. And there were days where I'd be working on the power plant project, and I'd look up and there would be spikes, hundreds of thousands of them, going out across McMurdo Sound, across the ocean. And they looked like they were 3 feet tall. But all they were little bumps that were being magnified. It's kind of like a mirage, a visual effect, a phenomenon. When it was really extreme, you could even see entire mountains flipped upside down. Or you'd see them mold together and connect like a bridge. There were 2 islands, Black Island and White Island. I remember one day it looked like they were physically touching, and there was a big hole. That was really fun. So the whole time, the place is reminding you constantly of how weird it is. But it was weird in an extremely beautiful way.
Yeah. You must have gotten to see, I was going to ask you about the storms too, right? Since you were over the winter.
Yeah. The condition ones he speaks of, this would be beyond the scope of this interaction tonight. There was a small building called the A-frame, which is a wonderful little hut. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first European, Westerner to scale Mount Everest, was part of the Antarctic program as well. And he was in love with this little hut. And I actually wrote something in the same little book that he had when he had stayed there. It doesn't exist anymore. A few years after I was there, I spent the night there, and we got trapped in a condition 1. That night turned into 3 days and nights with no food, no water. And if the furnace went out, we were done. There were 7 of us in there that we were just supposed to spend one night. And the winds got so bad, they tore the anemometers off the windbirds at McMurdo. So we don't know how high the winds got. But we were a couple miles away anyway on the transition, which is a place where the ice goes from about 100 feet thick to about 1,000 feet thick. But we just kept the fires going. We kept the shovels propped against the door so it wouldn't rip off the hinges. We would occasionally get it open to get some snow out. The door was buried in snow completely, and we'd get cups of snow and melt them for drinking water. But we had no bathroom facilities. It was 4 guys and 3 girls. And in fact, one of those gentlemen was in the film, Tom. He's one of the people who speaks. He's the guy who giggles a lot. He and I were trapped together in the A-frame, and they called us the Lucky 7 because we got to really spend 3 days with Antarctica up close and personal. The winds were so bad that the cabinets filled with snow from the inside. It pushed through the wooden slats and packed them with snow from inside. The difference in temperature between the desk and the tabletop and the floor was 70 or 80 degrees. So we would put a drink down there and then bring it up to drink it before it froze. And we kept our feet up on the table. But it was the best 3 days of my life.
Yeah, that was, I mean, sort of what you're describing was that there was that one scene in the film where they show you that like there was like a crack somewhere in this room and all the snow came in.
Yeah, that happened to us, but we were in the room at the time.
Right. Oh my God.
But that was
so I guess taken against that backdrop, I was going to actually ask you the next question first, because you were there over the winter. Powell kind of talks about missing certain things from home, especially I think over the winter, right? Were there particular things that you kind of like? I mean, obviously family, but
rain. I missed rain. I missed thunder and lightning. There is no thunder. There is no lightning. There are no insects. Well, I heard there is a little thing called a midge, but I never saw one. In the winter, there's nothing. So yeah, I missed the sun. They talked about it in the film, and they can't talk about it enough. When I saw the sun for the first time again, I couldn't feel it because the wind chill was like 80 below. I faced it. I closed my eyes. I wanted to feel the sunlight on my face. Nothing. But the feeling that I felt, for lack of a better word, was surprise. My body, it was like I had the brain I knew about, and there'd been this other brain somewhere hidden in me that I didn't know about. That was the physical brain, the body that doesn't get to think. It was surprised that it was going to live. It was the weirdest feeling in the world. It was literally, it's another thing I feel like I'm incapable of describing this, but it was probably the single most amazing moment of my life, because there was a part of me I didn't know existed until I saw the sun and felt it. And I think the only way to ever feel that part of yourself is to deny it the sun for months. And then for one brief moment in your life, you can glimpse it, and then it's gone again. Also smells. There are no smells whatsoever. Your own nose hairs stab you in the winter. When you walk outside, your headphones, if you open the door and swing and walk outside, your little Apple headphones, that little white wire has a copper wire inside it. It swings away from your body and freezes instantly in this funny, crazy shape. So everything is very strange down there in the winter. And when I went to the airport and I got off the plane, and there were news guys there because we were the first plane back at the end of the season, I was hit in the face with the smell of flowers. There were no flowers within sight. There must have been a flower shop in the airport somewhere. All I could smell were flowers for 3 days.
Wow. Okay, Brian, I was going to ask you next. What did you miss while you were down there?
Well, I wasn't there anywhere near as long as Michael and Lily, so I don't think I really got the opportunity to really miss too much, because it was it was a few weeks, and it was a longer trip that I was spending some time in South America, because that's how I came through. So I was back in civilization before I knew it. But I think the interesting thought that I had when I was there was when I thought about what my days would be like. I actually had the thought at first before the trip that there might be some downtime and like almost boredom, because we're so we're constantly engaging with so many things in our lives, that I thought are there going to be moments where, because I wasn't on email, I wasn't online, I wasn't watching anything on TV, like it was just like there was nothing like electronic in that way, and I thought, well, there'd be times where I feel like I'm bored, and just because of where I was and what I was seeing, there was never a moment of boredom. I mean, even just like looking at the horizon for an hour felt like it was exciting, which was weird for me, because I thought I'd miss some of the engagement of home and electronic devices, but I didn't miss anything like that. I probably would have eventually, but a few weeks was not enough time to seriously miss civilization. It was just basking in where you were.
Yeah, a few weeks seems like maybe a useful reset, right?
Yeah, it was a useful reset is the best way to say it.
Lily, since you were there for a while, you must have missed some things, right?
Well, actually, I have the same answer. I missed nothing. I wanted to stay forever. And I've been trying to figure, a lot of people have this experience where you have to, you really have to rearrange your life to spend time there. So it's hard. You either make a career out of it, which a lot of people do, because if you work there, grantees, science grantees will spend a few weeks at a time there. But the artist award is sort of a once in a lifetime shot. And so, yeah, to get back there, I'd have to get a job there where you have to commit to basically half a year or a year. So someday I will go back. I just need to figure it out. But yeah, I had sort of the opposite experience where I'm sure if I was there over winter, I would miss the sun, but I'm so curious about that feeling. But yeah, when we landed in New Zealand, the sun set because you fly through New Zealand. And so we landed in New Zealand and it was evening and I got like immediately sad. It was like seasonal affective disorder hit me when I saw the night for the first time in 3 months, because I just loved the 24-hour sunlight. I mean, that is something that really can make you feel high for a long time. And so it was like a crash when I experienced night again. And I was like, oh, I did not miss the night at all.
It's kind of like the opposite of Michael's experience, you know?
Yeah. Of course. And, you know, obviously I miss my family, but you have a new family there. Like it's this amazing sense of community because you're so removed from normal society and you just have each other, whether you're on the research station or you're in the field with the same 5 people spending all your time together for several weeks. So I'm a very social person and love that as an artist, I'm by myself most of the time. So it's just a really exciting experience for me to live collaboratively and work collaboratively and have that sense of camaraderie through all your meals, your sleep, everything you do. It's funny, like you think of it as a very isolating thing, and certainly people can keep to themselves there, but there's an amazing community.
So the last kind of like 2-part question I have before we get into some of it looks like there's some folks asking some questions in the chat. I guess I wanted to start with Brian, and I feel like I know the first part of this answer from all of you, but like, do you miss it? Do you plan on going back? And also, do you have any advice for people who might kind of listen to this or watch the film and go, "Ooh, maybe I'd like to go down there," you know?
Yeah, I would love to go back. I've only been there once, and it was 11 years ago. But going in the way I went as a tourist, it's quite expensive. Probably the most expensive. I wouldn't even say probably. It was the most expensive trip I've ever taken. So it's a once in a lifetime type of experience. And if there were opportunities for like research or work, that might be a much more economical way if you're doing it for part of work or part of a grant. But totally worth it. I mean, it was the whole trip is at minimum like a $10,000 trip. But there was that before you go, there's that moment of buyer's remorse. Like, do I really want to spend this tremendous amount of money on a trip? But zero regrets, like absolutely zero regrets. I would have even paid more if I had to, knowing what the experience was. So I would say totally worth it. Definitely once in a lifetime. Would love to go back, but again, cost is prohibitive. That's probably a reason not to go back, but would love to someday again.
Yeah. Michael, do you have an answer to that question?
Well, yes. I mean, if anybody wants to do it, the average age in Antarctica is 37, which is how old I happened to be when I was there. I got there, I'll skip all that, but basically I put my resume onto their website, www.polar.org. It's probably the same one now for the USAP. I don't know who the contractor is, but they use some logistics company, Raytheon or Lockheed, whoever's got the contract now. They're the ones who would be paying your salary and such. But if anybody's interested in going, I mean, we're all, proof that there's different mechanisms by which to get there. An art grant, just forking over the money as he did, and I respect you for that because it was a really smart move. And me getting, they told me that it costs over $100,000 just to keep me alive in Antarctica for the winter, not counting my salary and everything, just to keep me alive. Cost them $100,000 for your tax money. Did that, and so basically, my point is that I didn't realize what a long shot it was. They get 50,000 resumes a year for the Antarctic program for a relatively small number of positions. Had I known that, I could have been defeatist and not tried. I flew out to Seattle on my own dime, unemployed at the time, to try to get into the program. When I got out there, they wouldn't see me. And so I paid all this money to flew across the country, came back in a suit, and I was dejected. But then 4 months later, I had a phone call from a guy, Skip Matheson, ran the project for the power plant. He said, "Look, we're looking at your resume, your Navy experience, and we'd kind of like you to spend the winter." And he called me. We had a 3-hour phone interview, and that was it. It took 6 months of prep. There, for the winter, they have a primary crew and a backup crew, just like NASA. So I've always felt bad for whoever it was who had my job and didn't get it. They're hoping I would break my leg. But my point is that you try, and if it doesn't work out, you can try again. But there's a lot of young people there, men and women. About 10% of the program are women. And there's no reason in the world not to try. If you're fortunate enough to do it, it will be a life-changing experience. I promise you that. Winter, summer, it doesn't matter. It's amazing, and I can't sell it enough. But I met people there who were with me over the winter who had tried 13 times, guys with master's degrees, and he finally made it. It may not be the job you want, but you'll work hard. You work 60 hours a week. I work 60 hours a week outside in the dark. And that T3 syndrome they speak of is extremely real. We lost our short-term memory. Mine never fully recovered. So you pay a price, but it's well worth it.
Yeah. So Lily, I feel like I already know your answer to the would you go back question. And I feel like you gave me a little bit of advice about the artist program, but do you have any other things to say about that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the Antarctic Artists and Writers program is suspended as of last year, but we're trying to change that. So I don't know, write to your Congress people about it, write to NSF. I don't know if that's good advice. I don't know if that's the way to actually get it back. But if you're an artist or a writer or a filmmaker, keep checking the Antarctic Artists and Writers Program website, and you want to write a proposal. The point of the program is to communicate to the taxpayers what they're spending their money on, and to also give access to the general public, a place that most people won't have the chance to experience themselves. So if you can think about your project from that perspective, and really look at the science that's being conducted there's all kinds of research projects. There's a lot of astrophysics. There's a lot of geology, biology, looking at critters that live in the soil there. They used to think nothing could live on the continent itself, but there are microorganisms that live in the soil. And of course, the Antarctic Ocean, the Southern Ocean, there's a big marine protected area there now around McMurdo. So it's a very unique place. So there's biologists studying the marine organisms. So yeah, look at what research is being conducted, and as specific as you can get, write a proposal that speaks to those things. Pick one, but or yeah, like Michael said, there are jobs at South Pole and McMurdo and Palmer Station. There's 3 research stations that the U.S. has there. So yeah, those are, or if you're a scientist, study the Antarctic and write a proposal. Those are the 3 ways I know of, besides going the way Brian did as a tourist. So
yeah. So when you wrote your proposal, were you like, I would like to scuba dive, and
I've been working with oceanographers for many years for my paintings, going to sea on research expeditions. But I had never done any scuba diving because my interest was the deep sea. So I learned to scuba dive so that I could write a proposal to scuba dive under the sea ice in Antarctica.
That is like not a small ask,
So
though.
I had
I
to do 100 dives before I could, even think about diving there. So yeah, it took a couple years of training just to write the proposal. I was very committed. So yeah, I talked about how I wanted to actually paint sort of the range of biology from in Antarctica. So the Ross Sea is connected to the dry valleys. The dry valleys come off the Ross Sea. So I was going to dive in the Ross Sea and then work with biologists in the dry valleys, looking at the microorganisms that live there, and then the geologists that I had worked with before, they look at the way water behaves in the dry valleys, which is very unusual because it's very dry. Yeah.
Okay, so we have some questions that have come in. It says Rosalind will select the question. So I think she's putting them up on screen. Right. So this is a question about water supply. And then I think that's also tied into a question about waste management. Yeah. I sort of thought Michael might have thoughts here.
Yes. The waste management plant is using biology a lot. So I can't go too much into it there. When we were working on the power plant project, we'd actually remove the wall for a good part of the winter. So we were basically working outside in a building without a wall. It would fill with snow. But anyway, right across from it was the water plant facility and waste. They're all handled very close to one another physically. Because McMurdo Sound, as she said, McMurdo's right there at the edge of the Ross Island is the island that all of this takes place on for McMurdo. So they use reverse osmosis. They bring the water up out of the sea from beneath that 6 feet of ice she mentioned. And it goes through a process called reverse osmosis. I'll skip over that, but basically it's a rather expensive way of using diesel fuel to power a method to get drinking water out of it. At the South Pole itself, water is a gigantic problem. Even though they're on almost 3 miles of ice, the ice is so heavy, in fact, it actually pushes the continent below sea level. They can't use that water. All the water at the actual pole, Amundsen Scott Station, has to be flown in. So they get 2-minute showers at most, 30-second showers a couple times a week. I didn't get there. I got close. But that's about 700 miles from McMurdo. McMurdo does not have that problem. I never had any limitation on my water. Now, granted, I was there in the winter with a skeleton crew, about 100 people, for a station that supports 1,500. But we had no water limitations whatsoever. But that's how the plant does it. As for the biology, it's complicated. It can get knocked out of whack. When there was this guy, I'll skip all that, but there was a guy there who basically single-handedly ran the waste treatment plant during the winter, which I think was a lot of work for one guy. He worked very hard. But he was constantly trying to keep the biology right so that biology could do most of the work and break down the wastes, which would then be put back into the water supply, back into McMurdo Sound, but in a clean and healthy way. It is true that the National Science Foundation is all about not scarring the place, either physically or chemically. So in fact, we had flags where if we were working and we had to urinate, we had to find a yellow flag. All of that is dug up the next season and shipped back to the United States for disposal. So they don't mess around, but it was a real challenge for them to keep the biology, constantly tweaking it so that it was efficient at breaking down waste.
Yeah, I was going to ask Lily about that too, since you were in the dry valley. You guys must have had to just lug in and lug out, right?
Yes. Well, first off, there are no more yellow flags. You carry a pee bottle, which, as Anne's pointed out in the film, you have to be very careful not to mix it up with your water bottle, especially if you have 2 Nalgene's. Dangerous. So, but yeah, in the field, there's a bucket for solid waste. And then that gets taken back, sealed up, and gets taken back to McMurdo, along with the vat of emptied pee bottles that you collect back at your camp. Then that gets helicoptered back to McMurdo. And then I believe that gets put on the ship and sent to LA to be treated. So I think not all of it, or at least not the waste from the field, gets treated at McMurdo. It gets treated back in the US. And then what was that? Was there another part to the question?
Yeah, water coming in. So you must have just had to bring water with you, right?
Bring water. It's like the most extravagant car camping you'll ever do, where you get dropped in by helicopter. You pick out all your food. There's this giant pantry, and you pick out all the meals you're going to have with 5 other people for the next 3 to 6 weeks or whatever. And then you load it in boxes, and it gets loaded onto the helo and gets taken with you. So yeah, that's how you get water from town. We call McMurdo Station town.
Town, right? Yeah. Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add on that one, because I feel
No, since I came in on the ship and we were on the ship most of the time, it was, it was all everything on the ship and then back again.
Pretty self-contained, right?
Self-contained.
Yeah. So I think the next question that is going to appear here is about security. So are there protocols there with that? Is there any kind of security to be had? I mean, it seems to me like everybody down there sort of has a purpose in it, and there doesn't. I mean, I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts?
You don't need security because it's so hard to get there.
Yeah, like where's someone going to go if they did something bad?
Oh, well, they have had, you can get Con Aired out of Antarctica. And there's a marshal on station. So there's only one weapon and the marshal has it. So yeah. So there is law enforcement or whatever, but in terms of getting there, you go through Christchurch and then you get on a US Air Force plane, and obviously there's some security at that tiny little airport, but it's very different than normal airport security. Yeah. And then basically McMurdo, Palmer is different. Palmer Station is on the peninsula side, so there are it's more open to other kinds of ships and stuff. But McMurdo during the summer is frozen by there's sea ice everywhere, so you need an icebreaker to get through. So you'd have to have like another nation invade with ice or something to have a security breach.
It'd have to be like a really serious.
I think it's just too hard to get there. I don't know.
Yeah,
Ironically, the sea ice is there in the summer, and then it's open in the winter. It breaks up because it's so windy that it breaks up all the sea ice and blows it away.
Unfortunately, not the year I was there. The ice, I never saw fresh. I never saw water.
Wow.
Wow.
Not every year. Right. And then the following summer season, the divers have to get through ice that's like 12 to 20 feet thick instead of 6 feet thick.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
We did have an incident the year before I was there. In the winter, there is no marshal. There are no firearms on station. It's just a skeleton crew. But sometimes people have emotional problems because of seasonal affective disorder. It can't be tested for. They do the 900-question psychological test. It takes 3 days. I did that in Denver, Colorado. They picked me up in a limousine from the airport, which I thought was unnecessary, but I'll take it. But the winter before me, there was a guy who had some issues. He hit somebody with a hammer. So what do you do with that when there's no security? They locked him in a building and brought him food because he was a danger to everyone. But as somewhere through the winter, I was told the pipes froze and they had to let him back out into the general population. And everything was okay. But if it hadn't been, they just would have had to have dealt with it. It is true that in the winter, you are truly on your own. So we didn't have any such problems, but the year before they did.
Wild. On a lighter note, I think the next question is about the 48-hour film festival, which the film talks about briefly. Am I wrong? Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard about it, right? So I don't know if any of you guys know about this or where to find that material.
I don't know. There are some Antarcticans commenting. Elaine Hood has been piping in with a lot of useful information. Maybe she knows. But yeah, that was one of the most part of the movie that Ance's film was seeing the clips of the other Antarctic films, and I would love to find out where to see more of those.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Rosalind, cue us up. Oh, good question.
Well, oh, sorry. Do you want to say them?
No, I mean, you go ahead. How do you get back out of the water?
So because the water is so clear, you can see 1,000 feet. So you have to stay 1,000 feet from the hole so that you can make sure you see it. And you just sort of always check for it. And it's this glowing, it's like the sun. So you look for the glowing round thing every couple minutes. but one of my heroic stories in Antarctica was I dove daily with the contract divers who have been coming for decades. So Rob Robbins has done 2,000 dives under the ice. And he says, I don't know if it's true, but we were diving together and he turned to me and was like, where's the hole? He had lost track of it. And I showed him where it was. So that was my hero story of my time in Antarctica.
It's like he let you win it.
Thank you for saving my life. I think he would have found it, but and also there is a downline with flashing lights, so you can look for that too.
Yeah.
But that's how you find it. It's that beautiful clear water, and you just in 1,000 feet.
I guess a follow-up for me is like, what animals did you see down there? Because I know there are some. I mean, there
are tons. Yeah. Well, the just like on land, there's no plants, there's no seaweed or macroalgae, and the seafloor is volcanic, so it's black off of McMurdo at least. And so you see all the creatures really well. So you see lots of seals. We saw lots of giant Weddell seals. And then I'm into invertebrates, and there are lots of crabs and huge. There's a phenomenon called giganticism there because oxygen dissolves more readily in cold water. So everything gets big because they're getting more oxygen. So that they're giant sponges, like way bigger than you. Crazy jellies. Lots of weird worms. All kinds of lots and lots of crustaceans and invertebrate critters that I just love. So that's the main thing that I paint. And then one of my favorite animals there is called a sea angel, and it's this tiny, delicate looking thing that's translucent, and it has this bright orange inside. So it's related to snails. It's a pteropod. So those are my favorites.
That's so cool. I'm biased because I'm a full water person, but that's really cool. Okay, what do we have next? I feel like there's a couple more outstandings, right? Yeah, the portrayal of the continent. That's a really good question because I feel like I don't know how many people that are on the chat or the three of you have seen the Herzog film, but that was like my first introduction to the space anyway. And I feel like taken together, I feel like I have like a pretty full concept, but of course doing it justice is kind of a different question.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I thought it did. I think any film is going to have limitations. It's, one of those, it's different when you're actually there, but I couldn't imagine a film doing a better job of portraying it. So, with the limitations of film as it would be, as opposed to an actual experience, I found it to be quite engaging.
I feel bad for Ants that he had to take 10 years of footage and somehow crush it into an hour and a half. I think it was an impossible task. I think he did a beautiful job. He and his wife, Christine, I knew them both, and not particularly well, but, it was a small crew in the winter. But I think he did a very fair portrayal of an impossible thing to film.
Yeah, it's 10 years. That's a tough edit.
Yeah. I watched it the first time when I was still there. I was in a hut on the summit of Mount Erebus, the volcano, and we watched it together in the hut. And then I watched it again last week, and it was such a different experience watching it in those two places. We were in the hut. We were like, yeah, whatever. This is our life. And then like watching it this week, I was just in tears. Like it really brought me back. I think, is it the same as going there? Obviously not, but I think it did convey like the culture so beautifully, and the landscape, all the time lapse was really gorgeous. Yeah. And it's just beautifully shot, beautifully put together. I loved it.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, I think
I was too, but it was less overwhelming because we were there.
I think like the time lapse is a really smart choice, though.
Yeah.
So I think the last question that Rosalind was going to put up is right. kind of mirroring the question I asked you guys about arriving. So I guess maybe let's start with Brian, if you want. I mean, because you were still traveling, right? So
yeah, I went back to Ushuaia, and I had spent more time there on my way out. Ushuaia is a very southern part of Argentina, where typically people would set sail on the 2.5 or so day journey across the Drake. And so I had spent some time there before, so not as much time after. So then I, hopped on a flight to Buenos Aires. But even after a few weeks, it just felt odd to be back. I kind of adjusted in those few weeks to Antarctic life existence, and so it felt weird at first, but then that moment of like very shortly after, everything felt like a dream suddenly, like it didn't happen, like you fell asleep, you dreamt it, and that's it. Because then you feel like I can't believe I was there. It just you shift out so fast in a way. But I missed it immediately.
Yeah, Lily, I'm guessing you have an emotional experience to recount.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about experiencing night for the first time, and but yeah, you get a sort of culture shock. I remember coming back from the field to McMurdo and being like, I don't know how to talk to people that I haven't, I'd been talking to the same 4 people for like a month. And so I was like, how do I have a conversation? And then coming back to New Zealand, I was like, wait, I have to buy food and engage and talk to strangers. So there's this re-entry shock into the real world. And then, cars and trees and smells and all that stuff is very overwhelming. And then before I forget, there's a couple things that popped up in the comments. Elaine said the Antarctic Film Festival films stay on the ice for the most part. So it's one of those things, the experience of being there, but there are a few on YouTube. And then Helen Glazer is here, who reminded me to mention there's a newly formed Antarctic Artists Collective. So we all have connected with each other, which is amazing because it's been going on for decades and there's this great history. And so now we're finally in touch with each other. And there's a website that I think is on the screen now, aawcollective.com. So you can see more of all the artists and writers that have participated in the program.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah, Michael, how did you feel coming out?
He touched on it in the film. There's a culture shock when people come back on station, and that doesn't go away when you get back to New Zealand. It's worse. So I never would have imagined that. I'm a pretty social person. 279 days sounds like a lot of time to be down there. But in the winter, even though it's truly dark only for 4 months, because it's 24 hours a day, you really wind up in a timeless space. And because of the T3 syndrome, it's where your body creates T3 and T4, which usually goes into your brain. And it deals with short-term memory. But for reasons they don't quite understand, I think, it starts going into your muscles instead. So when I left Antarctica, my average body temperature all the time was 95.6 or something. So I was hypothermic all the time. So when we got back to New Zealand, in addition to the shock of people and stepping in front of automobiles because you're not used to them being there, and wearing shorts in the winter and all of that, there was this physiological healing process because we didn't have short-term memories. They were barely functional. It's hard to describe, but that's where we were at. So when we got to the airport, all I wanted to do was rub my toes in the grass. We stepped off the plane. It was the last LC-141 to ever leave Antarctica. I believe New Zealand made a stamp with that airplane on it. And when we got there were all these newspaper reporters because it was the last flight of the LC-141. And they stole the moment. I had this moment in my mind. I was going to get out of that plane and I was going to feel the warm air and get some grass. Instead, I was surrounded by reporters from Auckland, and I wanted to punch them. So I just got away from everybody, and me and my 2 friends agreed that we needed to get away. We were so white, our skin was so pale, everybody knew who we were. So everybody was constantly asking us questions just because of the color of our skin. We were obviously had not seen sunlight. So we left, and we went on a train across the Alps. They have Alps in New Zealand, to a small town called Greymouth on the other side of New Zealand, just to get away from people who would know who we were. And we got a beach covered in driftwood with little kiwi birds, and we sat on that beach for 3 weeks, and then we went home. And I have missed it every day since. But it was life altering. I lived at sea for 4.5 years. I thought that would be the high watermark of my life, living in a place that does not support human life, and thriving there. But McMurdo was very special. But yeah, it just, anybody who goes there is, you leave a part of yourself there. You do.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ever make it back. I have a wife. She wouldn't like it, but I would go tomorrow if I was single. So.
Yeah, it's truly sounds like a down is up is down situation. So I think we are almost at our stopping point. Do you guys have any last words before I kind of give my closing spiel? Everyone's like,
I mean, I'm grateful for this. I like the opportunity to relive this in a tiny way. And it is a thrill to talk to people who've been there and with such different experiences. When I was there, the dry valleys were so close I could taste them. But 45 miles down there might as well be 4,500 miles. It's completely inaccessible unless you have a helicopter. And I think that's fantastic. And it bugs me I never got to see penguins, really, because they're not there in the winter. And Brian, he got that experience. So you guys experienced really the two things that I never got. Was the wildlife and the dry valleys. And so it's not jealousy. I think it's awesome though that you guys got to experience that. It's a place of 1,000 facets. But anyway, thank you for the invite.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciated this experience because while I think about it fairly often enough, the experience, the questions help me relive it, as Michael said. So I'm grateful for that because it triggered all the memories that I had of the place. And so new appreciation again for Antarctica after this hour.
Right. Yeah. Lily?
Yeah, I think it was fun getting this group together because we all had a very different experience. And, people think like when I said I was going there, everybody's like, oh, I hope you're bringing a lot of white paint. And it's just such a multifaceted, very, very multidimensional place. So you could have a panel of 10 people or 100 people and they'd all have different experiences too. So yeah, and there are a lot of really great questions that I saw come through the comments that we're kind of out of time for. So maybe the discussion will continue a little bit online.
Yeah, I feel like, we can all jump on Facebook,
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and give my little, hit all my bullet points. But I'm really glad that this all came together. It was a shot in the dark trying to figure out how to get folks in the same space that it all sort of had similar experiences, but obviously very unique ones as well. So I'm really glad that you guys were able to sign on and commit to giving a little bit of your time. So I appreciate it. Yeah. And thanks to the Arts Council and FLICC and I guess to MPT too, which because we're on the list, it's, that's what I'm doing. And so then, to everyone who might be signed on or checking it out, look at the CCAC's website for information on the rest of the series. Next week's film is John Lewis, Good Trouble, which I have seen and is really a lovely film. And oh man, there's a Doc Talk event for that film with a special MLK Day spoken word performance from Do More Baltimore. But check the website for more information. And if you enjoyed this program or any of the others in the series, please feel free to donate to CCAC. But thank you to everyone for attending and checking it out and talking.